Hi everyone, and welcome to our Learn to Crochet a Scarf video tutorial. We're going to learn everything you need to know start to finish, even if you've never crocheted before. So let's get started. So today we're going to be using some Lion brand yarn. We're going to be using Color Made Easy. Now you can buy this yarn in stores, but you can also buy it online. And Lion brand has made this into a convenient kit for us. And it comes with 2 balls of yarn in lots of different fun colors, and it also comes with your crochet hook. Now you're going to need a K or 6.5mm crochet hook. When you look at hooks online and in stores, they're going to have letters and numbers on them. Just make sure that you find something that says K 6.5mm. You're also going to need some scissors and a yarn needle. Yarn needles are a little different than embroidery needles. They're much larger and they're easier to thread your nice bulky weight Color Made Easy yarn. Now I love this yarn because it is bulkier, which means that the strand of yarn itself is a bit thicker than a lot of other yarns, and that's going to mean that your stitches are larger and easier to see when you're first starting out. So let's go ahead and learn to crochet. Alright, so getting started here with our Color Made Easy yarn, we're going to grab the end of the yarn from the center of the ball. So dig down deep in here in the end of the skein. There's a little opening and you can just grab a whole bunch of yarn. It should kind of yank out of the center there, and you're just going to need to find the very end of the yarn. So once you kind of dig around in there and find the end, we're going to make a slip knot. Loop your yarn around in a loop, put the tail behind the loop, reach through the loop and grab the tail. Don't pull it all the way out, but just pull it a little bit through the loop. Hold on to your 2 tails hanging down and pull the loop to tighten the knot. That's an adjustable slip knot. Now we're going to take our crochet hook, insert the hook into the loop, and pull on the knot to slide it tight to the hook. We don't want to tighten this down really tight onto the hook, just close enough where it can slide around a little bit, just like this. That is our slip knot, and now we're ready to get started with our chain stitches. We're going to forget that that tail exists and just use the working yarn that's attached to our ball of yarn. Hold onto the yarn however it's comfortable for you, and let's chain stitch. Wrap your yarn around the back of your hook, yarn over. Hold on to your slip knot with your index finger and your thumb, and pull your yarn through the loop. That's a chain stitch. Do it again. Wrap around the back, yarn over, hold on to your knot, and pull through. That's a second chain stitch. Keep going, yarn over and pull through. And now you're chain stitching. For this pattern, we need to chain 24 stitches. You can count as you go, or you can count the little V-shaped stitches that you're making. They should be hanging down from your crochet hook. Yarn over and pull through, yarn over and pull through. Just keep going in this way until you have 24 stitches. Again, you can count this easily by just counting those V shapes, as each V counts as a stitch. The loop on your hook at any given point does not count as a stitch. Go ahead and keep chaining, keeping your tension loose. And make sure that you wind up with a length that you're happy with, as this will be the width of our finished scarf. Mine is about 8 inches, and that's the perfect width of scarf for me, but if you need to adjust this to fit your needs, I would do that now. So just keep on going, chain stitching until you have 24. We're going to be working this scarf in what is called a half double crochet stitch. There are lots of different crochet stitches called single crochets and double crochets, and lots of more intricate ones as well. I'm going to teach you my favorite in this video called a half double crochet. But once you master this and make your scarf, you'll be able to follow lots of other crochet tutorials here on YouTube. So go ahead and count your chains and make sure you have 24, again not counting that loop currently on your hook, and not counting your slip knot. Now we're going to work a half double crochet. Count down from your hook 3 stitches, or 3 V-shapes. Once you've identified the third one, again ignoring this loop on your hook, we're going to start a half double crochet. All that is a series of wrapping your yarn around your hook and pulling it through different places. Let's do this. Here's your third stitch. Wrap your yarn around the back, yarn over. Insert your hook into the top of that V, or the left leg of your V, the top of your chain stitch. Push your hook through. You should have a strand of yarn on your hook now. Yarn over, wrap your yarn again around the back of your hook, and pull it under and through that loop you just picked up from the chain stitch. You should have 3 loops on your hook now. Keep your tension loose, nothing's going to fall off. Yarn over, wrap your yarn around the back, and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Go slow and gentle here, relax, make sure your shoulders are down and your hands are not tense. Let's do this again in the very next stitch or the very next top of your V shape. Yarn over, wrap around the back, insert your hook. It should look like now you have a strand of yarn on your hook. Yarn over, wrap around the back, and pull it through. Yarn over one more time and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. There you go. Now we've worked 2 half double crochets and it should look something like this. It should look almost kind of like a knot with another V shape sitting on top of it. Keep going, working in that very next V shape. These are again half double crochets, and that's the only stitch we're going to use for this entire scarf. If you've gotten to this point, you can make the entire scarf. Just stick with it. It might feel a little awkward to you at first. If you've never held yarn before, it's something that your muscle memory has to learn. Sculptors aren't born in a day, and neither are crocheters. So give yourself time and a little grace, and just stick with it long enough to let your hands learn what your brain is telling them to do. If your stitches don't look even as far as tension goes, and what I mean by that is some stitches look tight and some stitches look loose and it's not very uniform yet, that will come with time and practice. It doesn't mean that you can't crochet. It just means that you're new. So keep going here. You're going to work 1 half double crochet stitch in each of those V chain stitches all along the bottom there. You should wind up with 22 half double crochets. Remember how we skipped to the 3rd stitch in the very beginning of this row? So we're going to reduce by 2 from our original number of chain stitches, which should have been 24. We should wind up with 22 half double crochets in this row. Each row moving forward should also have 22 double crochets because we want to keep this nice and even going along. And we're just going to keep crocheting here, the same stitch. Don't worry if you're not as quick as me. Don't worry if your stitches look a little different. Just keep going. Pause and rewind as you need to. If you need to rip out and start over at this point, just yank on that working yarn after you remove your hook and everything will come undone and you can start over. So just go ahead and keep going. I'm going to speed this up a little bit so that we can get to the next part. Once you get toward the end of your row, you might be asking yourself, where do I stop stitching? I have a slip knot here, but I don't know how to do this. Well, let me show you. Once you get to the end, you'll have one last V or chain stitch right next to your slip knot. Go ahead and work in that stitch. This should be your 22nd stitch. Just as we've done with all of these other half double crochets, yarn over and pull through. Okay, so now we should have, again, our 22. You can count that by counting the little knots, or what we call the post of the stitch, along that row, or by counting those V's sitting on top. The V shape is what we're going to be working into when we come back the other way. Just make sure that you go ahead and count at this point. When you're new and you're still learning and things are a little confusing, it's nice to take the time to count your stitches and make sure that you don't wind up with a wonky scarf after all of this work. So we need to work a little vertically so that we can come back the other way. So by doing that, we're going to chain 2. Remember, chain stitch is just yarn over and pull through. So do that twice. And we're going to flip this over because we always have to work right to left. So flip it over like this so that we can again start on the right side of things and move left. We're always going to flip it over at the end of a row. And let me show you where to work your very first half double crochet of row 2. Now it can get a little confusing here because there's a lot of V shapes happening. There's the 2 chains that we just created to get that vertical kind of linear situation so that our sides aren't tight. And then we have all of our V's along the top that are the tops of those half double crochet stitches. That's what we're going to work into. Don't work into the chain 2. Make sure that those 2 V's right here are not worked into. We're going to work into this one right here, the very top of our last half double crochet stitch from the row below. Okay, so half double crochet, yarn over, wrap your yarn around. Make sure you're working into the top of that very first actual stitch. Now push your hook through both legs of the V. Yarn over, wrap your yarn around, pull it through. We should have 3 loops. Once again, same story. Yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. The movements of the half double crochet from here on out for the rest of the project are exactly the same. You're just inserting your hook into the whole V, both legs, instead of just one side like we did when we were working into our chain. So you can see here what that looks like. Have 3 loops, yarn over, and pull through. That's what it should look like. So we should have a straight edge here on the right hand side, and they should kind of be stacking. So if you're looking at the post of the stitch, it should kind of stack on top of the row below. So again, remember, it's yarn over, wrap your yarn around, and work into that very next V shape. Both legs, yarn over, pull it through, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. Keep going in each stitch all the way along. We should have another 22 stitches in this row. This is row 2, and we're working across what is called the back side or the wrong side of the work. And we're just going to keep going, and I'll show you when we get to the end of this row how it should be looking. Because again, the very beginning of the row and the very end of the row can be a little confusing. You might find that you have an extra stitch or you're missing a stitch as you work along and you have like a trapezoid kind of shape. That just means that you're adding stitches or taking away stitches when you don't mean to. So here, coming to the end, the very last stitch that you want to work into, let me zoom in, is right here, that last V shape. It should look like a very distinct V. Everything beyond that last distinct V is going to look just kind of like a bunch of strands of yarn. So go ahead and work a half double crochet into that last V, and now we should have 22 stitches. When you look at the edge at the end of the row, you'll see those chain stitches from the row below. That's what those are. And that's why it kind of just looks like a bunch of strands of yarn. It's not an actual stitch that you want to work into, so just ignore it. And as long as you have 22 here, you're looking good. And if you look at it from the side, that chain stitch from the row below is gonna look kind of like a V, but kind of not. So don't get confused. Go into things that look just like V's and nothing else. So go ahead and chain 2 again. Remember, that's just yarn over and pull through and flip it over. Now we're going to work back the other way. Again, always right to left. And same story here as before. Don't work into those 2 chain stitches, just work into that very first stitch itself. Yarn over, insert your hook into both legs of the V, pull through a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Your edge should be looking really straight right now. Crochet by nature is just a series of knots, so your edges might look a little knotty, but they shouldn't look crooked or slanted. They should just look kind of knotted, if anything. They look straight to me, but I know that when you're a brand new crocheter, the nature of the shape of the stitch can be a little bit confusing. So now we're just going to keep going in the same fashion, working back and forth, half double crocheting all the while. I'm going to show you here the tops of the stitches again are just V's. Always make sure that you're working into both legs of the V when you insert your hook in a stitch, and then when you get to the end, go into the last distinct V shape, which is right here. Don't work into those turning chains from the row below that look more knotted. So right here is your last stitch. It's easy too to identify this when you're looking at the whole row at once. Once you've worked all the way to the end of the row, it's a little bit more confusing. So maybe stop and take a look at this point and really identify where you're going to be stopping things. But go ahead and just keep crocheting half double crochets. If you need to rewind at this point and watch me keep making the movements to help you along for the next several rows, go ahead and do that. Again, that's the great thing about YouTube is you can pause and rewind as much as you want. It's not a live teacher, so you can take all the time in the world. Now, once you have worked along, and you should have about 70 inches of crochet. Here's my last row. About 6 feet is the perfect double loop infinity scarf. Once we've worked the last stitch in our row, once we like the length, go ahead and snip the yarn, leaving a long tail. And just yarn over and pull that tail all the way through. That's going to finish off our stitch and knot things in place so that nothing will come undone. So now we have about 6 feet of crochet, and we're going to sew this up to make an infinity scarf. So you're going to need your yarn needle that we talked about in the beginning of this video, and we're going to match up the very beginning of our scarf, that chain called the foundation chain, or those foundation chain stitches, and our last row of crochet. Now we're going to go ahead and thread our yarn needle, and we're going to get ready to sew this up. This is really, really simple. We're not going to do any kind of like fancy seam. We're just going to keep this basic. But first I'm going to show you how to weave in your end from either end, either the foundation chain end from the slip knot or the end that you just finished off on your last row. Whichever end is longer, that's the one you want to use to sew. The other one you're going to want to weave in. So you're just going to thread your needle, and then you're going to kind of work this through the actual posts of the stitches. You can also weave by weaving between the stitches, but that's not going to be as secure. So just kind of wiggle your yarn needle through the actual posts of the stitches and those little strands of yarn that seem to be tightly knotted together. If you bury the end in those strands, it's going to be a lot more secure. So go ahead and work back and forth in different directions. Usually 3 or 4 times does the trick, and then snip your yarn close to the work so that you can't tell where that end is. Okay, go ahead and match things up. Thread your longer end on your yarn needle, and we're going to just stitch along to sew this into an infinity scarf. You don't have to complete this step if you want to leave it as just a long rectangular scarf, but I like infinities. They're a little easier to wear and style for me. Okay, so thread your yarn needle, and we're just going to let this yarn that's attached to our last row of stitches stay attached. And we're going to sew to the foundation chain. So your last row of stitches is going to look a little different than your foundation chain. The foundation chain looks a little more rope-like, and your last row of stitches has all those V's on top. So all I'm going to do is start working from one side to the other, and we're going to kind of work back and forth almost as if we're threading a shoelace. This is called a mattress stitch. So you're going to work in from the center being the space between the 2 panels. Work through both legs of the V shapes, or the tops of the stitches, and then work through the chain stitch itself. There should be 2 strands of yarn there that you're working through on the chain stitch side, and then 2 strands on the half double crochet side. However you do it, just make sure that you're working from the center out, as if, again, you're tying your shoelaces. This is going to give a lot more of an invisible join. You can also use a whip stitch if you're familiar with that, which is just whipping around and sewing through. There are lots of different seaming techniques for crochet, and there's lots of videos on them all over YouTube. This is the one that I think gives the most polished result while also being really simple. So this is how I like to do it. Make sure that you're matching up your stitches and you're not skipping any as you go along, so that your ends match up at the end of the work. And again, you should have had 22 stitches in each row going all the way across, so you should have the same size or width of scarf at the beginning and at the end. So keep going all the way to the end here. Once I get to those last couple of stitches, I'm going to just reinforce it a little bit by stitching back and forth a couple of extra times just to make sure that the seam is really sturdy, because this is going to be, you know, the piece of the work that holds the most stress as far as the stretching goes. So I want to make sure it's really reinforced and really strong. So go ahead and just sew until you feel that it's really, really secure, and then you can go ahead and weave in that last end. Okay, you guys, so we have finished our scarf. It's ready to wear. We can wear it long like this, looped once, or we can loop it twice and wear it nice and thick and warm. This was a lot of fun to make. I hope that you guys enjoyed making yours too. If you want to learn to knit a scarf just like this one, I do have a beginner knitting tutorial as well that uses this exact same yarn, has the kit, all of that fun stuff if you want to learn to knit. Now you're ready to go make a bunch of beginner and even advanced beginner crochet projects. I have a lot on my website at www.sewrella.com. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you love your scarves. Bye-bye.